I don't want to hear it, Mom. I already heard everything from my wife. Slap. The sting that radiated across my cheek was more than just physical pain. It was the sound of my own heart shattering, the heart of a mother who had given her entire life, her entire being to her son. My own son had turned his back on me, all because of a single lie. And so, without a word, I walked out of that house. But 6 days later, a 3-minute video appeared online. It contained every last bit of the truth I had so desperately wanted to tell. And that truth would plunge the very people who had condemned me into a silence so profound, they would never be able to look anyone in the eye again. This is not a story I tell just to speak of my sadness. This is a story for you, for anyone out there right now who is suffering, unable to find their voice. I want you to know this. Do not be afraid to speak your truth. From the moment you raise your voice, you are no longer alone. My name is Evelyn Miller. I was born in 1946, in a small town tucked away in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place where dogwood blossoms drifted through the air like snow in the spring, and the winter cold seeped right down into your bones. My family ran a small general store. We were by no means wealthy, but we always had food on the table and clothes on our backs. As the second daughter, I was taught from a young age to share, to be patient, to live for someone else. I never had what you would call a dreamy childhood. Back then, it was normal to start working right after junior high. With money being tight at home, I left school early. I spent my days helping my mother, quietly mastering the skills I would need: sewing, cooking, knitting, and mending. It was all part of the unspoken preparation for becoming a good wife. No one ever asked me, "Evelyn, what do you want to do?" To be honest, the thought never even crossed my own mind. I only ever had one wish. As long as my family could live in peace, that was enough for me. At 21, I got married. My husband was a kind, serious man who worked as a technician at a steel mill in Pittsburgh. We didn't have much money, but we had a small house and our only son, and he was my entire world, my greatest hope. My husband was a quiet, steady man, a hard worker who adored our boy. I was a homemaker, managing everything from the daily meals to getting our son's school uniforms ready. The word sacrifice wasn't in my vocabulary. I simply believed that this was what it meant to be a mother and a wife. It was my duty, my purpose. But then, when I was 59, my husband died suddenly from a stroke. The home that had been so full of warmth felt cavernous and empty overnight. At the dinner table, there were just two of us, me and my son, Michael. I told myself, I cannot fall apart now. Michael was still preparing for college. I had to be his rock. Flattered? So, I started working. In the mornings, I took a cleaning job at a local clinic. In the afternoons, I brought home piecework to assemble. Even after I turned 60, I rode my old bicycle over 2 miles every day, rain or shine. My one and only wish was to make sure my son got a proper education. That was all that mattered. Years passed. The day finally came when Michael graduated from the university with his engineering degree. As I watched him walk across the stage to receive his diploma, I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down my face. He was my pride and joy, the culmination of all my hopes. For the ceremony, I wore a simple but nice dress that my own mother had left me. I stood quietly in the very back row of the auditorium. When it came time for pictures, I stayed where I was. I just didn't want to be a bother, that's all. A little while after that, Michael told me he wanted to get married. I was overjoyed, truly. Without a moment's hesitation, I went to the bank and pulled out my passbook. It was the money I had painstakingly saved for nearly 20 years since my husband had passed away, about $150,000. I gave it all to him, for the wedding and to help them start their new life. I believed that was what a mother's love was supposed to look like. The wedding was held at a small hotel in town. I didn't know a single person from the bride's side of the family. I just offered polite nods and quiet smiles, making my way around the room to make sure everyone's glass was full. That night, I stayed at the hotel. I couldn't go home, you see. I was already renting out a room in my little house, anything to help raise a bit more money for them. A few weeks later, Michael and his new wife came to visit. His wife sat down next to me on the sofa, took my hand in hers, and said, "We're family now. Please come live with us, Mom." Those words warmed a part of my heart that had been cold for a very long time. I nodded quietly, and soon after, I packed my few belongings and moved into their brand new, three-story house. It was a house I had helped them build. By co-signing the mortgage and putting my own name on the line at the bank, I truly believed it. I believed that all my years of quiet sacrifice were finally being rewarded. That for all the long years of raising a child alone, of working until my body ached, of gritting my teeth through the hardest times, this was my gift. I believed that from then on, I would be surrounded by family, living out my final years in peace, with smiles and laughter. I truly, truly believed it, but I never could have imagined. The moment I stepped across the threshold of that house, a new chapter of my life began. It was a chapter filled with blame, with cold, empty stares. And, waiting for me in the shadows, was a painful truth I wouldn't uncover until much, much later. The day was coming when I would learn a hard and bitter lesson. Not everyone is capable of cherishing the person who raised them. At first, living together was perfectly fine. I fell into a routine. I'd wake up early every morning to make breakfast, clean the house, and walk my grandson to his preschool. My son's wife, Jessica, worked as an accountant at a nearby firm. She always seemed busy, but I did my best to help out, making sure she never had to worry about what was happening in the kitchen. If I can just be peaceful and humble, I told myself, this family will be happy. I was sure of it. But then, about 3 months after I moved in, I started to notice that something was off. I can't pinpoint the exact day it started, but I realized that Jessica's eyes didn't hold the same warmth they used to. She spoke less and smiled even less, and she started taking hushed, secretive phone calls in the kitchen. One afternoon, as I was rinsing vegetables in the sink, I overheard a few fragments of her conversation. Words like, "I have proof," and "we have to be careful so she doesn't find out," drifted across the room and stuck in my mind. The moment I stepped fully into the kitchen, she abruptly ended the call and turned to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water as if nothing had happened. I didn't ask. I was too afraid to know the answer. Maybe I'm just imagining things, I told myself. I had to believe that. I tried my best to push the feeling away. And so, slowly, I began to retreat into myself. I started to avoid eating meals with the family, finding excuses to be elsewhere. I stopped lingering in the living room, that bright, open space that now felt like it belonged to someone else. Night after night, I would close the door to my small room and sit in the quiet darkness. The only sound was the muffled drone of the television from downstairs, a constant reminder of the life that was going on without me. I would sit there, all by myself, and just try to swallow the loneliness that had become my constant companion. But even then, I tried to make excuses for them, for the chill that had settled over the house. It's just because I'm getting older, I would tell myself. I'm just not in step with their way of doing things. It's a different generation. Ty. I tried so hard not to think about it too much. I didn't want to cause any trouble. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the shelves in the pantry, when my grandson, Leo, my bright, beautiful 5-year-old boy, came running up to me. He threw his little arms around my neck, his cheek warm against mine, and whispered right into my ear. "Grandma," he said, his voice soft as a secret. "Mommy said you're hiding food." I went completely still. It felt as though an icy hand had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart, until it couldn't beat. I could feel the blood drain from my face, but I forced a smile, a shaky, brittle thing, and gently pulled back to look at him. "Oh, did she?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Is that what Mommy said?" He nodded, his eyes wide and innocent, before wriggling out of my arms and running back to his toys in the living room, the moment already forgotten. But I couldn't forget. I stood there, frozen in front of the open pantry, the dishcloth still clutched in my hand. I have never, not once in my entire life, hidden a single thing for myself. Not a cookie, not a piece of fruit, nothing. When there was something special in the kitchen, a treat I knew he'd love, I always made sure to set a piece aside for Leo. Just the other week, I had bought a beautiful cut of salmon, my absolute favorite, but I saved it, cooked it just right, and served it to Michael and Jessica for their dinner, telling them I wasn't hungry. Seeing them enjoy it was enough for me. It had always been enough. I turned and walked back to my room, leaving the pantry shelves half cleaned. I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed in the dim afternoon light. I sat there for hours, not moving, as the sun went down and darkness filled the small space. Everything started spinning in my head. Jessica's cold, dismissive eyes, the hushed whispers that stopped the moment I entered the kitchen. The fact that Michael had been going out so often at night lately, coming home late without a word. The conversations between us that had become shorter and shorter, until they were barely anything at all. It was all a tangled mess of confusion and hurt. But I couldn't bring myself to ask them about it. I was too afraid to face whatever the answer might be. But Leo, his innocent, unfiltered words had been like a splash of cold water. They woke me up. I knew then that I couldn't keep pretending not to see what was right in front of my face. After that day, I started paying closer attention. I noticed how the whispering would start the very second I stood up from the dinner table to clear my plate. I saw the way Jessica would pointedly look away, busying herself with her phone, whenever I walked into the kitchen. And then, the little traps began. She started leaving half-eaten things out, an open bag of chips with just a few crumbs left, placed back in the pantry. A carton of juice with only a sip remaining, put back in the fridge. And then I'd hear her mutter, just loud enough for me to hear, "I wonder who had a snack and put this back, again." I didn't want to believe it. I truly didn't. It felt too cruel, too senseless. But somewhere deep inside my heart, a terrible cold fear was starting to take root. And I began to tremble. And then, one night, long after I'd heard Michael and Jessica go upstairs and the house had fallen completely silent, I did something I never thought I would do. I quietly opened the bottom drawer of my old wooden dresser. Tucked away in the back, beneath my sewing kit, a bottle of aspirin, and a roll of duct tape, was a little box. Inside was a tiny camera, no bigger than a sugar cube. It had been a gift a few years back from a grandniece, a tech-savvy girl who was always buying the newest gadgets. "You could use it on your walks," she'd said, "or take pictures of the flowers in the garden, Aunt Evelyn." I had never even taken it out of the box. But that night, I did. My hands fumbled with the tiny device. I spent nearly an hour under the dim light of my bedside lamp, figuring out how to insert the memory card, how to turn on the recording function, how to get the angle just right. And then, holding my breath, I crept downstairs into the dark kitchen. I found a spot on top of the cupboards, hidden behind an old vase, and I set it up. From that angle, it captured the whole small kitchen, the stove where I cooked, every meal, the counter where I prepared Leo's lunch, the sink where I washed the family's dishes. I didn't want to blame anyone. I didn't want to suspect my own family. I wasn't trying to spy. I just needed to protect myself. I whispered the words to myself in the darkness of that kitchen. If I'm wrong about all this, if I'm just being a foolish old woman, I'll erase it all immediately. I'll throw this thing away and never think of it again. But if something is really happening, if I'm not imagining it, then I have to, at least have proof. From then on, my nights were filled with a gnawing anxiety. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. And every morning, before anyone else was awake, I would sneak downstairs, retrieve the camera, check the footage from the day before, find nothing, and then quietly put it back in its hiding place. I didn't tell a soul. I couldn't bear for anyone to know. I was just waiting to find out if I was losing my mind, or if something truly terrible was happening in my own home, right when my back was turned. That night, a cold, misty rain was falling, tapping softly against the windows. After I had tucked Leo into bed, reading him his favorite story until his breathing grew deep and even, I went downstairs to clean up the kitchen. When I got there, my heart sank. The sink was overflowing, a mountain of dirty plates, pots, and pans from dinner. We had broiled salmon that night. I remembered it clearly because the smoky smell still clung to the sleeves of my sweater. As soon as she'd finished eating, Jessica had stood up without a word and gone straight upstairs. Michael hadn't moved from the living room couch, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone. Not wanting to be a bother to anyone, I quietly rolled up my sleeves and began to wash each dish, one by one. The hot water turned the backs of my hands red. It stung every time it hit the little nicks and cuts on my fingertips, a sharp, familiar pain. That I was used to it. After decades of being a mother, of running a home, you get used to working through the pain. You learn to ignore it. Over the sound of the running water, I suddenly heard shouting from upstairs. It was Jessica's voice, sharp and piercing. "I told you, Michael. I told you she wouldn't listen." Then, my son's voice, angry and loud, fired back. "You said you saw her, right? You said you saw my mom bagging up food to hide in her room?" I froze right where I stood. The sponge slipped from my hand and fell into the soapy water with a soft splash, sending droplets onto my face. My hands, they were shaking uncontrollably. I hadn't misheard them. There was no mistake. They were talking about me. On trembling legs, I turned off the water and started up the stairs. The familiar old staircase suddenly felt impossibly long, like I was climbing a mountain. As I got closer to the top landing, I could hear their voices more clearly now. Coming from the living room. "I've told you before," Jessica was saying, her tone laced with frustration. "She doesn't even think she's doing anything wrong. It's some kind of problem. God, if the neighbors ever found out," Michael mumbled, "it would be so embarrassing." I don't know what came over me, but I didn't stop. I walked straight into the living room and stood in the middle of the floor. I forced the words out of my tight throat. "Are you two accusing me of stealing food from this house?" The air went still and heavy. The world seemed to stop. Jessica immediately looked away, staring at a spot on the wall. Michael looked down at the floor, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. I took another small step forward. "I haven't hidden anything," I said, my voice cracking with a pain so deep it felt like it was tearing me apart. "If there's been some kind of misunderstanding, please, just let me explain." I never got to finish. My son cut me off, his voice as cold as ice. I heard it all from Jessica. "There's nothing to explain." And in the next instant, he raised his hand. He hit me. The sound of it, a sharp, ugly smack, seemed to echo in the sudden, dead silence of the room. That sound is still branded in my memory. The sound of his hand striking my left cheek. It's a sound that will never, ever go away. The room was utterly quiet. I realized the television had been turned off at some point. I just stood there, my hand pressed to my stinging cheek. It wasn't the physical pain that stunned me. It was the disbelief. It was the complete and utter shock of what had just happened. My own son. The boy I had birthed, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had just struck me. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. My mind felt like a blank white canvas. It was as if I was trapped in a terrible nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. A nightmare where the mother who had devoted her entire existence to her family was being treated like a common thief. "Hey," Jessica said nothing. She simply turned, her back rigid, and walked silently up the stairs. Michael still wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, frozen in place. I took a deep, shuddering breath and found my voice again. It came out as a weak, trembling whisper. "Did I do something wrong, Michael? I cook for you. I clean this house. I take care of your son. If you don't want me to live here anymore, I will leave. I'll go. But why did you have to hit me?" My son didn't answer. He didn't apologize. He just stood there in silence, saying nothing at all. I went back to my room, turned the lock on the door, and sank down to the floor. My cheek was still throbbing. a hot, stinging reminder of what had just happened. But the coldness inside me, that was so much worse. It felt like a piece of ice had settled deep in my chest, freezing me from the inside out. I glanced into the small mirror on my dresser. There, on my red and swollen cheek, was the clear, unmistakable imprint of a hand. My hair was a mess, streaked with more gray than I could remember. My eyes were shadowed with dark circles, the result of so many months without a single night of real rest. I looked at the tired old woman staring back at me and asked her a question. Is this the price of a mother's love? Is this my reward for a lifetime of patience, of scrimping and saving, of living every single day for my child? I wasn't angry. I was just so incredibly sad. I was sad that my own son, without asking me a single question, without a moment of hesitation, acting on nothing but a single word from his wife, had raised his hand to his own mother. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. It wasn't because of the pain in my cheek. What truly terrified me was the thought of living in that house for one more day. The place I had once called home, the place I thought was my safe harbor, had now become a place of fear. The next morning, I woke up at the same time I always did. I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, and packed a lunch for my grandson. But, for the very first time in my entire life, I said nothing to my son. No good morning, no, have a good day. Or, I said nothing at all. I simply moved through the house in silence, like a shadow, a ghost that no one could see. I watched as Michael left for work, the briefcase he carried, the shirt on his back. I had laid them all out for him, just as I did every morning. As I watched his back disappear out the door, I felt a pain so sharp it was as if my heart was being torn right in two. He had chosen to believe a stranger's words over his own mother's. In that single, terrible moment, everything had changed forever. That morning, I stood in the small upstairs bathroom for, I don't know how long. Time seemed to stop. The water from the shower head dripped, one drop at a time, a steady, rhythmic sound in the quiet room. But I couldn't feel its warmth on my skin. It was as if a sheet of ice had formed around my heart, numbing everything. I splashed water on my face again and again. I wanted so badly for that numb, tingling sensation to just go away. But the angry red mark on my left cheek remained, a stubborn, vivid testament to the night before. Before I went back downstairs, I gently dabbed it with a towel, trying to hide it. I carried the breakfast tray to the dining table, setting out the plates and forks just as I always did. But as my hands went through the familiar motions, a single question swirled in my mind, over and over again. What am I doing? Am I really standing here, preparing a meal for the person who just hit me? And yet, my hands kept moving. A force of habit. The pancakes were hot off the griddle. The bacon was perfectly crisp, and the eggs were just the way he liked them. The only thing different about that morning was this. No one ever came to sit at the table. Jessica came downstairs first. She gave the carefully prepared breakfast a quick, dismissive glance, grabbed the carton of milk from the refrigerator, and walked right past me without a word. She didn't even look in my direction. There was no greeting. It was as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house. Michael came down a few minutes later. With his briefcase in hand, he walked silently toward the front door. As he brushed past me, his hand grazed the corner of the table. But even then, he never once met my eyes. Not a single word, not even a quiet, "Mom, about last night, I'm sorry." There was nothing. I felt as if I had become an invisible woman. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the closed door, and a thought came to me. If I were to walk out of this house right now, would anyone even notice I was gone? Or would life here just go on as usual? The only difference would be that the person who makes the meals was no longer around. I didn't cry. Perhaps I had simply run out of tears. Later that afternoon, I went out to do the grocery shopping, just like I always did. On my way back, I stopped at the little park near our house, the same park where I used to spend hours playing with Leo. On one of the benches, an elderly woman sat with her granddaughter, patiently spoon-feeding her a small cup of yogurt. They were both smiling. Their faces lit up with a simple, uncomplicated joy. The moment I saw them, my chest tightened with a sudden, sharp ache. It wasn't so long ago that Leo would run to me, wrapping his little arms around my legs, shouting, "Grandma, Grandma!" But now, did he still even think of me as part of his family? After hearing his own mother say terrible things about his grandmother, day after day? When I got home, I opened the refrigerator. The steamed vegetables I had cooked the day before had been shoved to the very back of the bottom shelf. They were already starting to go bad. And on the container of leftover pot roast I had saved especially for Leo, a small piece of paper had been taped. On it, in Jessica's neat handwriting, were the words, "Expired, do not eat." I didn't say a word. I just quietly took the containers and threw them into the trash can. But as I did, I felt something else. It felt as though someone had just taken everything I had ever believed in and thrown it away right along with the food. That evening, I went back to my room and opened my old journal, just as I did every night. But this time, I could only manage to write a single line. "I don't think I belong in this house anymore." I gently closed the notebook. Then I stood up and walked over to the kitchen. A few weeks ago, I had set up a tiny camera on top of the cupboards. Now, I carefully took it down. I removed the little SD card, but I didn't look at what was on it. I just wanted to make sure it was still recording properly. I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm not trying to cause some big scene. I just needed some kind of proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I needed a record of this anxiety, of this churning, awful feeling in my chest. I needed proof that it existed. I put the camera back in its hiding spot and went quietly back to my room. I no longer hope for an apology. I don't expect anyone to ever admit that they were wrong. I just pray that someday, the truth will come out for everyone to see. That's my only wish. That night, after the shouting had finally stopped and the whole house was wrapped in a suffocating silence, I knew I had made my decision. I have to leave. It wasn't a decision born of anger. It wasn't because the love I had for my son had vanished. It was just, if I stayed here any longer, I was going to lose myself completely. Day after day, being treated like a shadow, forcing myself to believe that I was nothing more than a burden. If I kept living like that, I wouldn't be me anymore. That night, in the darkness of my small room, I quietly began to pack my things. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to wake anyone, or, to be more accurate, there was no one left in that house worth waking. Everything I owned fit into one old, worn-out suitcase. A few summer dresses, the framed family photograph we had taken on my wedding day, a yellowed old notebook, and the cash I had carefully saved, little by little, from my Social Security checks. I didn't leave a letter. There was no message, no final word. I just wanted to slip away quietly, without bothering a single soul. Because, in the end, that was the only way I had ever known how to live. Just before I walked out the door, I paused for a single moment. It wasn't to look back. It was to do one final check, to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, to make sure I didn't leave my self-respect behind. No one saw me off. No one asked where I was going. Not a single light turned on. Not a single door opened. And just like that, the woman who had sent her son through college, who had contributed $150,000 to his wedding, who had spent every single day cooking and cleaning and caring for her, grandson walked away from that house as if I were a complete stranger. I caught the last bus heading toward the old city center, toward a neighborhood I had visited a few times when I was much younger. The place I rented was a tiny room with paper-thin walls and a low ceiling, but it was something else, too. It was a place that was mine, and mine alone. A place where no one could look down on me, where no one could blame me, where no one was watching my every move, and where no one would ever call me a burden again. At 78 years old, I decided to start my life over. My Social Security check came to about $800 a month. It wasn't enough to live extravagantly, but it was more than enough for 3 simple meals a day. In the mornings, I would walk to the park down by the old stone church to read the newspaper. Sometimes, I'd strike up a conversation with the other older women who were also out enjoying the morning sun. In the evenings, I would come home early, make a small pot of vegetable soup for myself, and eat my dinner in quiet solitude. Sometimes, I dream. I dream that my grandson Leo is shouting, "Grandma, let's play!" and throwing his little arms around me in a tight hug. When I wake up, the only sound in the room is the steady tick-tock of the clock on the wall. And in that quiet moment, a thought will drift into my mind. I realize that I have finally learned how to be alone. Every month, I send a card for my grandson's birthday. I don't know if he ever receives them. I've never once gotten a reply. But I send them anyway, because it's what I've been doing for him ever since the day he was born. Time passed, flowing quietly and steadily, like water under a bridge. Then, 6 months later, I was going through an old wooden dresser, looking for my winter sweaters, when my fingers brushed against a small, forgotten object. It was a tiny mini camera wrapped carefully in an old linen cloth. I couldn't breathe. In that instant, I felt it with every fiber of my being. This little device was connected to the reason I had left my home all those months ago. I had completely forgotten it even existed. Ever since I'd left that house, I had forgotten the very act of recording anything at all. But the moment I picked up that small piece of machinery, something deep inside my chest began to beat, hard and fast. I found my old laptop, slid the small SD card into the slot, and after the screen flickered a few times, a list of short video files popped up, one after the other. They were all just a few minutes long, and every single one of them was a silent recording of the kitchen in that house. I started playing them one by one. There I was, making a pot of rice. There was Jessica, washing the dishes. They were just small, ordinary fragments of daily life. But then, on the 17th video, I froze completely. Jessica was on the phone with someone. Her voice was quiet, but I could hear it clearly. I turned up the volume. It's a problem if she stays here forever. So the only way is to hurt her pride and make her leave on her own. I felt a jolt, like an electric shock, and my hand nearly slipped off the mouse. Just make her think it's her fault. If she feels like she's the one ruining the atmosphere in the house, she'll get so uncomfortable that she'll just leave. Every single one of those words was like a knife, slicing right through my heart. But the thing that chilled me to my very soul, it wasn't her voice. It was her eyes. They were cold, calculating. They looked nothing like the eyes of the woman who had taken my hand on her wedding day and called me Mom. It was like looking at a stranger. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. After a few moments, I played the video again. There was no mistake. God were way. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy. I don't know how much time passed as I sat there, staring at the screen. But eventually, I slowly stood up, and I knew exactly what I had to do. It wasn't for revenge. It was to reclaim the truth. I burned that video onto 3 separate DVDs. One was for my son, Michael. One was for Jessica's parents. And the last one was for my own cousin. The one who had told me to my face that the person being thrown out is always the one at fault. I didn't include a note. I didn't write a letter. I just wanted them to see it with their own eyes. I don't want an apology anymore. I just want the people who turned their backs on me that day to see the unvarnished truth. That afternoon, with the 3 discs in my handbag, I walked to the local post office. The sun was shining gently in the sky, and a soft breeze rustled through the maple trees lining the old streets of the neighborhood, stirring the quiet, sleeping memories inside me. Along the way, I saw an elderly couple walking hand in hand. The husband was carrying a small grocery basket, and his wife held a little bouquet of chrysanthemums close to her chest. They were smiling at each other. In that instant, I felt a sharp sting in the back of my nose. I used to dream of a peaceful life just like that, surrounded by my grandchildren, tending to my flowers, cooking for my family, and sharing simple stories as the sun went down. That was the small, quiet life I had always wanted. But I suppose, for me, that was too much of a luxury to ask for. At the post office, a young woman at the counter greeted me with a kind, polite smile. "Would you like to send these by priority mail?" I just nodded silently and pushed the 3 sealed envelopes across the counter toward her. I watched her, transfixed, as she carefully affixed the stamps to each one. It felt as if every one of those small, sticky squares of paper was sealing away a forgotten piece of my own life. O's, Tess. That night, I sat by the window in my small room. The faint glow of the streetlights outside cast a hazy, soft light on the old, clouded glass. In my hands, I held a warm cup of chamomile tea. It was the kind my late husband used to drink every night. I didn't take a sip. I just held it in my hands, letting its warmth seep into my skin. Yeah, I thought about my son. I remembered how, when he was just a little boy, he was so afraid of the dark. Whenever the power went out, he would scramble onto my lap and whisper, "I'm scared." "Mommy?" That little boy? He has now become the coldest presence in my life. But I can't. I can't blame him anymore. I honestly don't have the energy to blame him anymore. What would hating him even change? People always say, time heals all wounds. But I've come to believe something different. I believe that healing can only truly begin after the truth comes to light. They were just 3 small DVDs. But to me, they were like 3 quiet flames setting fire to the past. I don't know what will happen now. Silence? Denial? Or something I can't even begin to imagine. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I was no longer the woman who would suffer in silence. I've held my tongue for so long. Time and again, I have swallowed my words. Time and again, I have held on to hope. And time and again, I have been let down. And now, for the very first time, I have chosen to speak, precisely at the moment when I was expected to be silent. The next morning, I woke to the sunlight filtering through my curtains. Wrapped in the soft glow that slipped through the gaps in the old lace, a strange, new feeling began to bloom deep inside my heart. I'm not afraid of tomorrow anymore. And I knew why. Because, at the very least, I could hold my head up high and say that I had done the right thing. It hadn't even been 2 full days since I mailed those 3 discs when the landline in my small rented room suddenly began to ring. The sound sliced through the quiet of the afternoon, and my heart gave a sharp, painful jolt. For years, the only calls I ever received were from insurance salesmen. I picked up the receiver. The voice that came through the earpiece was trembling, just slightly. "Evelyn, it's me, your sister-in-law. We all got together today, all the relatives, and we watched that video. No one could believe it. Listen, Evelyn, do you still have the original file? Please. Could you come? Could you come and explain it to everyone?" I was quiet for a long moment. From the other end of the line, I could hear her heavy, labored breathing. And then, I said just one thing. "I don't want an apology. I just want you to acknowledge the truth." She didn't say anything more after that. I think, in that moment, she finally understood. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't even have the strength to be angry anymore. That night, a soft June rain began to fall over the city. It wasn't a heavy downpour, but it was cold, and it felt like the kind of rain that could go on forever. I was alone, making myself a small pot of simple soup. Then, I heard a soft but urgent knocking at my door. Time, knock, 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 knock. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it. Standing there was my son. There, on the doorstep of my small rented room, he was on his knees in the rain. Water dripped from his hair, his shirt was plastered to his body. His hands were shaking, and his eyes were red and swollen. "Mom." His voice was a raw, broken whisper. I was too scared. I still haven't watched the video. But everyone is saying it. They're all saying I was wrong. "Mom, can you forgive me?" I just stood there saying nothing. It wasn't because I was moved, or because I was surprised. It was because I had waited so very long, to hear those words. And now that they were finally here, I felt nothing at all. I don't hate him. I truly don't. I was just so tired. I quietly motioned with my hand for him to come inside. I gave him a towel and made him a warm cup of tea. He kept his head down, refusing to meet my eyes. The only sounds in that tiny room were the drumming of the rain on the old tin roof and the ragged, choked sobs of a grown man who had finally realized he had lost his mother. I never thought you'd go so far away, Mom. I thought you'd come right back. But then you were gone, and then the video started getting passed around, and all the relatives started calling, and I finally. His words trailed off into another sob. I didn't ask him to finish. I just looked at him, looked at this stranger with a familiar face. After months of silence, I finally spoke. So you haven't seen the video, but you believe it's true because everyone is saying so? Then tell me this. Back then, when you chose to believe your wife's words, did you ask her for proof? He remained silent, unable to answer. I continued, I don't want you on your knees. I don't need your tears. I only ask one thing of you. I want you to learn to ask questions before you make up your mind. And I want you to teach your own child that staying silent is not the same as being right. He broke down completely then, crying out loud. I just watched him, with no pain, no joy, and no anger. Just an empty, hollow heart. He finally looked up and said, I want to tell everyone the truth. I want to apologize to you in public. I want to make Jessica apologize too. I slowly shook my head. What happens between you and her is a matter for the two of you. This isn't something you handle through a third person. If she feels she needs to, she will come on her own. And if she doesn't, then that's that. I have no desire to drag anyone else into this chain of resentment. I don't want anyone else to have to pay a price for my pride. I just want the truth, once it has been brought into the light, to never be twisted again. That is my only wish. That night, long after my son had left, I couldn't fall asleep. My little room, always quiet, seemed to be wrapped in an even deeper stillness, a silence so profound it felt as if time itself had stopped. I sat at my small desk, watching the way the yellowed light from the lamp cast shadows into every wrinkle on the back of my hand. They were the marks of time, and they could not be erased. I opened my old journal and began to turn the pages, one by one. The clumsy handwriting from months ago was still there. The names of dishes I had cooked, a note about the day Leo caught a cold, a list of birthday presents I had been planning to buy. Every single word was a fragment of a memory. Each one was small, but they all felt so heavy. I suddenly asked myself a question. How many of these things did I write for myself? And how many were for someone else? From outside the window, I heard the faint meow of a cat. It was the gray stray, the one who came every night to eat the scraps I left out. For him in a little dish, the cat just stared at me. There was no fear in its eyes, no expectation. It was as if it was simply saying, I'm here. I smiled. Sometimes, the quiet presence of an animal can offer more warmth than any human word ever could. I went to the door and put the last of my leftover dinner into the dish for him. Then I just stood there, watching him eat in the quiet of the night. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet grass and damp earth. In that moment, a thought came to me. When was the last time I sat down to eat with someone without having to worry? I thought about the future. That house, the one I once would have given my life to protect, was now nothing more than a faded photograph in my memory. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had taken my hand and called me Mom, had been the one writing the cruel script all along. And then, I thought about myself. Am I still the same me I was back then? The woman who smiled easily, who forgave quickly, who was always doing something for someone else, was I still that person? Or maybe, now, I had become the kind of person who understood boundaries, who could say no, and most importantly, who could walk away when she was hurt. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I quietly closed the door to my small room and slipped into bed. Before I turned off the lamp, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. Some wounds can never be healed. But at the very least, I will not let the same pain be repeated. 3 days later, a letter arrived for me. The return address had a name I didn't recognize. When I opened the envelope, I saw it was from a cousin of my daughter-in-law, Jessica. The letter was written in a careful, almost hesitant hand. Dear Mrs. Miller, I saw the video and I was so shocked I couldn't find the words. I am so sorry for what my family has done to you. I feel so ashamed of myself for believing all the terrible things Jessica told me about you. To think that all of it, that it was all just a fabrication. If you need any kind of legal support, please know that I will do anything I can to help. I gently folded the letter and tucked it into the back of a drawer. I didn't need a trial. I didn't need to win or lose. All I had ever wanted was for the people who had doubted me to understand one simple thing: that my silence had not been a sign of surrender. I wanted them to know that sometimes silence is a form of strength. It is the quiet patience of waiting for the right moment, for the moment when the truth can finally be heard. Ever since that rainy night, my son has not called me, not even once. I suppose he knows. He must know that what I need right now is a little time. Or perhaps there are words he is simply too afraid to hear. As for me, I no longer wish for anything at all, because I have learned a hard lesson. I have learned that of all the things you lose in this life, there are some that can be recovered, and some that can never be made whole again. Money can be earned back, a reputation, in time, can be restored. But trust? Once trust is broken, it can never ever return to its original shape. From the day my son knelt on the doorstep of my little rented room, a slow but steady ripple began to spread through our family. That video found its way into the world in a way I never could have expected. It was shared by the very people who had once stood by and silently watched me leave. It was passed from their hands, quietly and deliberately, from one person to the next. For the very first time in my life, I saw it. I saw the way the eyes that once looked at me as if I were some kind of villain now flickered with confusion, unable to meet my gaze, dropping to the floor instead. My husband's relatives called an emergency family meeting, but this time, it wasn't to cast blame. It was to discuss what to do now. In the middle of all this, I received a phone call from my brother-in-law, a man who had never once taken my side in anything. Evelyn, he said, his voice heavy. Everyone feels just terrible about this. That girl, Jessica, she needs to make a public apology. We can't just sweep this under the rug. I didn't answer right away. I just stood by my window looking out. The wisteria I had planted in a pot on the small porch was blooming, its purple flowers swaying gently in the breeze. And behind his words, I could feel the truth. This wasn't really for Meg. It was for the family, to save face and protect their reputation. A few days later, one of the relatives offered their home for another gathering. I did not attend. But I heard that my son went in my place. I heard he told them everything. He told them about the slap. He told them about the video recording. And he told them about the truth his wife had admitted to with her own lips. I learned the outcome of that meeting from a simple text message with only 3 lines. She refused to apologize. She went back to her parents' house, Leo with her. No idea when she'll be back. I read the message over and over, but my heart felt nothing. There was no surprise, no sadness. I just accepted it for what it was, the inevitable end. I heard that Jessica cried when she got to her parents' house, but I was told they were not tears of regret. They were tears of frustration, anger that the video had gotten out, rage that she had been publicly shamed. I couldn't bring myself to blame her, because I know that there are people in this world who, even when their lies are exposed, feel no shame. Instead, they despise the person who brought the truth into the light. Such people truly do exist. My son now lives all alone in that 3-story house we built together. According to one of the neighbors, he rarely goes out anymore. She said he often just sits on the front steps, smoking one cigarette after another. And he was a man who always claimed to hate the smell of smoke. Perhaps that is his own form of penance. One morning, I woke up early. I made myself a small pot of oatmeal. Then, I walked to the law office where I had an appointment I'd made some time ago. In my hand, I held the deed to the house. the house that was once registered in my name. Sitting across from me was a young lawyer with a kind, sincere face. He reviewed the paperwork one last time and looked at me, his expression serious. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mrs. Miller? The current market appraisal is over $350,000. If you donate the entire property to this charity, there will be no way to get it back in the future." I smiled and nodded. "I'm sure," I said. "I no longer have any attachment to something I was once rejected from. If that's the case, I would rather it be used to help people who are in the same, act for humanity situation I once was." And then I signed my name. That house, what was once my home, the place I was supposed to return to, and the place I was cast out of without a single word. It no longer belongs to our family. The property was officially transferred to the Safe Haven Foundation for elderly victims of domestic abuse. It was an organization I had learned about by chance at a community seminar. I can still clearly remember the words of the foundation's director. "The elderly don't need sympathy," she had said. "They need to be trusted." I was once a person who was not believed. That is why I pray, with all my heart, that whoever comes after me will not have to live their life in the shadows, the way I did. When I returned to my room, I placed the copy of the transfer agreement into an envelope and put it away in my old wooden dresser drawer. In that same drawer is the very first letter I ever received from my grandson Leo. It's from when he was still learning to write. His letters big and wobbly. "I love you, Grandma." I don't know if the Leo of today even remembers me, but I still think of him. I always will, even if everything else has changed. The next day, I went for my usual walk in the park. The sun was out, a rare and beautiful thing, and the city was hosting a senior event, an outdoor sketching class. A young woman, the instructor, was handing out sketch pads and charcoal pencils. She saw me sitting on a bench and called out to me with a warm smile. I smiled back and quietly took a seat with the others. And then, for the first time in so many years, I held a pencil in my hand. I drew a small house nestled by a quiet creek. Purple wisteria flowers hung from the eaves of the porch, and an old woman was sitting there, peacefully pouring a cup of tea. I don't know if that woman was supposed to be me, but in the world of that drawing, she was all alone, but she was living in peace, and most importantly, in a place where no one could tell me I didn't belong. I was simply smiling. That evening, I was alone. I had made myself a warm cup of herbal tea and opened the window to look out at the small patio garden below. There, in the dimming light, were the potted flowers I had been tending to myself. A gentle rain, the kind that whispers of a new season beginning, was falling onto the leaves, each droplet catching and reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. I settled into my wooden chair, leaned my body back against it, and held the warm mug in my hands, letting my heart slowly, finally, find its peace. I have come through the most difficult days of my life, and as I look back now, I know one thing for certain. I am no longer the woman I once was. The woman who did nothing but endure. My name is Evelyn. But the Evelyn I am today is a little different. I am the Evelyn who has learned, just a little, how to protect her own pride. The Evelyn who has learned, just a little, how to draw a line for herself. And the Evelyn who, in the end, found the courage to walk away for her own sake. I used to believe that your later years were meant to be spent close to your children and grandchildren. That was just the way it was supposed to be. But now, I can say this without a shadow of a doubt. Being close to someone does not mean you have to accept being hurt by them. It doesn't matter what the relationship is, even if it's between a mother and her child. There is never an excuse for coldness, for violence, or for lies. That night, I wrote a letter. It wasn't for anyone. I had no intention of ever sending it. It was just for me, a way to finally write down all the things I had never been able to say out loud. In that letter, I wrote about so many of my memories with Michael. The nights I held him in my arms until he fell asleep, the moment he spoke his very first word. The look of pure joy on his face the first time he managed to eat all by himself. I wanted to take those memories just as they were and keep them beautiful in my heart one last time. When I was finished, I placed the letter in a small wooden box I keep next to the framed photograph of my late husband. My husband passed away without ever knowing what my final years would look like, but I know that if he were still alive, he never would have allowed me to be hurt like that. Not for a moment. Thinking of him brought a small sting of tears to my eyes. But I did not cry. I just took a single deep breath and quietly put that chapter of my life as a mother, to rest. The next morning, I went to a used bookstore downtown and bought a few small paperbacks. On my way home, I stopped by the local community center. My reason for going was simple. I wanted to sign up as a volunteer to support other seniors who were living on their own. The young woman at the front desk looked at me with a little surprise in her eyes. "Mrs. Miller, you're 78, is that correct?" she asked gently. "And you still want to help support others?" I gave her a warm smile and answered, "As long as I'm still healthy. The least I can do is listen to people." Sometimes, just listening can be the greatest support of all. I didn't tell her that I was once a person who had no one to listen to her. I didn't tell her about the months I had endured in loneliness and doubt. I just thought that if, right now, there was another grandmother out there somewhere, hiding her own loneliness behind a single smile, then I wanted to be the one to quietly sit down beside her. In the afternoon, on my way back home, I bought a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums and placed them in a vase on my windowsill. The summer sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, so clear it almost looked like a lie. On the power lines outside, a little flock of sparrows hopped and chirped, full of life. I smiled to myself, poured another cup of tea, and whispered a thought into the quiet of the room. I think I'll try living for one more day. Not waiting for anyone anymore. Not asking anyone to understand me. Just, as the person who made it through the storm, I will stand firmly on my own 2 feet, and I will live. I was once a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. And then, with a single slap from the son I had raised with my own 2 hands, with one cold look from his eyes, and with the simple words, "There's nothing to explain," my trust was completely shattered. I used to think that as you get older, the best thing you can do is learn to endure. That for the sake of peace in the home, a grown-up knows to stay quiet. But after long days of silence and humiliation, I finally realized something. If you do not raise your own voice, no one will ever cry out for you. So I left. I walked out of that house, the house we had built together, the one that was supposed to be my security in my old age. Like Callie, from that rainy night, from the moment I walked alone down that wet and empty street, I began the journey back to myself. 78 years old. I thought it was far too late to start anything new, but I learned how to live on my own. I learned to listen to the voices of others, and most importantly, I learned to listen to the voice inside my own heart. Every morning, I take a walk in the park. I cook my own meals, seasoned just the way I like them. I paint, I read books, and I volunteer to support other lonely seniors in my community. I am no longer waiting. Not for a phone call from my son, or for an apology from my daughter-in-law. Because I have learned that true healing doesn't come from someone else's regret. It is born from your own sense of acceptance and your own dignity. I have donated all of my property to a foundation that supports elderly victims of domestic abuse. Some people told me I was foolish, that I was being too emotional. But this is what I believe. If that property couldn't protect me, then it is better off being used as a shield for someone else. Even now, in a corner of my small room, I keep a few precious things: the framed photograph of my husband, a birthday card from my grandson when he was just a little boy, and the letter I wrote to myself. No one will ever read it, but I will always keep it. It is my proof that even after walking through the darkest days of my life, I never lost my pride as a human being. When the morning comes, I open my window and breathe in the new day. I pour a cup of tea, and I whisper quietly to myself, "Evelyn, today, live for yourself." And that feeling? It is kinder and more comforting than I ever could have imagined. Now, if there is anyone reading this who lives with their parents, I ask you to do something. Please remember, when you were sick with a fever and crying in the middle of the night, who was the person who held your hand? Who was the one who supported you as you took your very first step? Before you allow a single person's words to make you doubt them, please just remember. And if you are an elderly person, please listen. Do not ever think that staying silent is the best way to keep the peace. Sometimes, that silence becomes the very foundation upon which injustice is built. Please raise your voice. Write it down. Keep a record. Not for revenge, but to protect the truth. And if you have ever felt that your own family made you feel as though you didn't matter, please do not lose heart, even if you are living by yourself right now, in a small room where no one can see you. You are not a small person. You are not insignificant. Your quiet strength is the most beautiful and precious thing of all. What do you think? If you, too, have a story that you feel needs to be told, please, I hope that you will share it in the comment section below. Perhaps, somewhere out there in the world right now, there is a mother, just as I once was, who is quietly wishing, so desperately wanting to believe. And she may be waiting to hear a voice that sounds just like yours. And if anything I have shared here has brought tears to your heart, please leave a single teardrop emoji in the comments. This isn't for me. It is for every mother, every father, and for every single person who is hurting in silence, unable to speak their truth. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end. My name is Evelyn Miller, and today, as always, I am living for myself.